in a case that terrorized the central U.S. for decades. Investigators believe the BTK killer may have had more victims than we first knew. Emily Akena now, and what they found in his backyard this week.
He's known as the BTK killer, or bind, torture, kill, who in 2005 admitted to brutally murdering 10 people near Wichita, Kansas.
I had many, what I call them, projects.
You don't understand me. I am beyond good and evil.
Utilizing force in my life.
What makes a person a monster? Is it the number of lives they've taken? The cold, calculated way they did it? Or is it the sheer terror they managed to spread, not just in one city, not just in one country, but across the entire world? Throughout history, there have been individuals whose crimes were so unspeakable, so deeply disturbing, that they forever changed the way we think about evil. Their names are burned into our collective memory. Their cases filled newspapers, terrified communities, and forced governments to rethink how they catch and prosecute criminals. Some of them were charming, some were hiding in plain sight, some were doctors, lawyers, fathers, neighbors. None of them were what they seemed. Today, we're counting down 15 of the most notorious killers in world history, spanning continents, decades, and body counts that are almost impossible to comprehend. We'll look at who they were, who their victims were, how investigators tracked them down, and in some cases, whether justice was ever truly served. This video is presented with deep respect for every victim and every family still living with the weight of these tragedies. These were real people. Their lives mattered. Let's begin. Music swells. Title card appears. 15. Richard Ramirez. Round Pushpin, United States, crime period. 1984-1985, victims. 13 confirmed. Los Angeles, 1985. A city paralyzed. Residents were sleeping with their windows bolted shut in 90-degree heat. Hardware stores sold out of deadbolt locks within days. Gun sales spiked across Southern California. Nobody felt safe in their own home because Richard Ramirez had made sure of that. Ramirez was born on February 29, 1960, in El Paso, Texas. By his teenage years, he had already been deeply exposed to violence, reportedly influenced by a cousin who showed him graphic photographs of war atrocities. He drifted to California and descended into drug abuse and petty crime before something inside him broke entirely. Between June 1984 and August 1985, Ramirez crept through open windows and unlocked doors in the dead of night across Los Angeles and San Francisco. His crimes were random, vicious, and diverse. He shot, stabbed, and beat his victims, ranging in age from 6 to 82. There was no single profile, no predictable pattern. That randomness was itself the terror. He left pentagrams at crime scenes. He forced some survivors to swear their love to Satan. He wore dark clothing and AC/DC t-shirts, earning him the tabloid nickname, the Night Stalker. His capture in August 1985 was extraordinary. A group of East Los Angeles residents recognized him from a newspaper photo and physically subdued him in the street before police arrived. He was convicted of 13 murders and sentenced to death. Richard Ramirez died of cancer on death row in 2013, never executed, after more than 2 decades of appeals. 14. Dennis Rader. Round Pushpin, United States, crime period. 1974-1991, victims. 10. For 30 years, the people of Wichita, Kansas, lived alongside a monster and had absolutely no idea. Dennis Rader was a church president, a Boy Scout troop leader, a compliance officer for his local government. He gave out citations to neighbors for code violations. He was, by all external measures, a pillar of his community. He was also the BTK killer, a name he coined himself, standing for bind, torture, kill. Between 1974 and 1991, Rader murdered 10 people across Wichita, including an entire family. He then vanished. Decades passed. Cold case detectives had little to go on. Then, in 2004, Rader made a catastrophic mistake. He began sending letters again. He wanted credit. He needed to be recognized. He taunted investigators, asking in one letter whether a computer floppy disk could be traced. Police assured him, falsely, it could not. According to reporting by the Wichita Eagle, forensic analysts traced metadata from that disk to a Christ Lutheran Church computer, registered to a man named Dennis Rader. He was arrested in February 2005. He pleaded guilty to all 10 murders and was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms. His daughter, Carrie Rawson, later wrote a memoir about discovering the truth about her father. Her grief and shock became a story unto itself, a reminder of how many lives a killer's crimes destroy. 13. Aileen Wuornos. Round Pushpin, United States, crime period. 1989–1990, victims. 7. Aileen Wuornos' story begins long before her crimes, and that context matters. Born on February 29, 1956, in Rochester, Michigan, Wuornos was abandoned as a child, endured profound abuse, and was homeless by her early teens. She survived largely through sex work along Florida's highways. By the time she committed her first murder in 1989, she had lived a life that most people cannot begin to imagine. Between late 1989 and 1990, Wuornos shot and killed 7 men along Florida highways. She claimed in some cases that her victims had attacked or attempted to rape her, and that she acted in self-defense. Prosecutors argued the killings were premeditated robberies. The truth likely lies somewhere complex. She was arrested in January 1991, convicted, and ultimately executed by lethal injection in October 2002. Her final words were, "I'd just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus June 6. Like the movie, Big Mother Ship and all, I'll be back." Wuornos became the subject of countless documentaries and the 2003 film Monster. Her case continues to raise difficult questions about trauma, the justice system, and whether America failed her long before she ever pulled a trigger. 12. David Berkowitz. Round Pushpin, United States, crime period. 1976–1977, victims. 6. New York City, 1977. A city already battered by financial crisis and rising crime was now gripped by something new, pure, targeted terror. David Berkowitz prowled the streets with a .44 caliber revolver, shooting couples in parked cars and young women sitting on stoops. He murdered 6 people and wounded 7 others across 13 months. Then he sent letters, including the famous Son of Sam letter to NYPD Detective Jimmy Breslin, taunting police and calling himself a monster doing the devil's bidding. The city descended into mass anxiety. Women dyed their hair, afraid of reports that Berkowitz targeted young women with dark, curly hair. Nightlife emptied. The NYPD formed a 200-person task force. Berkowitz was caught in August 1977, not through sophisticated forensics, but because of a parking ticket issued near one of the crime scenes. Investigators matched the ticket to his name, found his address, and arrested him at his apartment in Yonkers. He pleaded guilty and received 6 consecutive life sentences. He is still incarcerated, has repeatedly been denied parole, and has claimed to have become a born-again Christian in prison. 11. Richard Kuklinski. Round Pushpin, United States, victims. Disputed, claimed over 100. Richard Kuklinski was a family man. Coached Little League, took his kids to church, by all appearances a normal New Jersey father. He was also a contract killer for the New Jersey and New York mob, who became known as the Iceman, a name reportedly derived from his method of freezing victims' bodies to disguise time of death and confuse medical examiners. The true number of his victims is contested. Kuklinski himself claimed responsibility for over 100 killings in interviews conducted after his arrest, but law enforcement has only been able to confirm a handful. He was convicted of 5 murders in 1988 following an undercover sting operation by the New Jersey State Police. His interviews, collected in HBO documentaries, are some of the most chilling ever recorded, not for dramatization, but for the complete flatness of his tone. He described killings with the emotional distance of someone recounting a grocery run. He died in prison in March 2006, just before he was scheduled to testify in another murder case. 10. John Wayne Gacy. Round Pushpin, United States crime period. 1972–1978. Victims, 33. John Wayne Gacy hosted parties. He dressed up as a clown, Pogo the Clown, he called himself, and entertained children at neighborhood events in Norwood Park Township, Illinois. Beneath his house, in a crawl space, investigators would eventually find the remains of 26 young men and boys. Gacy was a contractor and a Democratic Party precinct captain who had even been photographed with First Lady Rosalind Carter. He lured young men, many of them runaways or workers he hired through his construction company, to his home. He drugged, assaulted, and murdered them between 1972 and 1978. He called his victims worthless little queers and showed no remorse. When investigators finally searched his property in December 1978, after a missing 15-year-old named Robert Peast was traced to him, the full horror emerged. 7 additional victims were never identified for decades. Some remained John Does until recent DNA technology finally gave them names. Gacy was executed by lethal injection in May 1994. His last words were, "Kiss my ass." 9. Andrei Chikatilo. Round Pushpin, Soviet Union/Russia crime period. 1978–1990. Victims, 52. In Soviet Russia, serial killers didn't officially exist. The government couldn't admit it. Ideologically, such crimes were supposed to be products of capitalist decay. And so, for 12 years, Andrei Chikatilo murdered across the Soviet Union with near impunity, while investigators tied themselves in knots trying to deny the obvious. Chikatilo was a schoolteacher, quiet, unremarkable. Between 1978 and 1990, he lured at least 52 victims, mostly children and young women, to remote areas where he committed acts of extraordinary brutality. He confessed to each killing in meticulous detail after his arrest in 1990. The investigation was one of the largest in Soviet history, and one of the most bungled. An innocent man, Alexander Kravchenko, was wrongfully convicted and executed for one of Chikatilo's murders. The blood type mismatch that should have cleared Chikatilo earlier was dismissed as a lab error. Chikatilo was finally arrested after an undercover officer observed him approaching a young girl at a train station. He was convicted of 52 murders and executed by a single gunshot to the back of the head in February 1994. 8. Gary Ridgway. Round Pushpin, United States crime period. 1980s–1990s. Victims, 49 confirmed. For 2 decades, women went missing along the highways of Washington state. Many were vulnerable, runaways, sex workers, women's society often looked past. And for 2 decades, their killer walked free, going to work at a truck painting factory, remarrying and living an ordinary life. Gary Ridgway was finally arrested in 2001, not because of a tip or a witness, but because of DNA evidence. Saliva samples collected from a 1987 bite mark on a victim matched Ridgway's DNA, collected during a 1987 voluntary interview he had given police. He confessed to 71 murders, making him one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. He was convicted of 49. In exchange for information that helped locate victims' remains, he was spared the death penalty and sentenced to life without parole. Ridgway's case became a landmark in forensic DNA development. It also forced a painful public reckoning. The victims had been dismissed for years because of who they were. Families of the missing had begged police to do more. They weren't heard quickly enough. 7. Harold Shipman. Round Pushpin, United Kingdom. Victims, 215 confirmed, up to 250 suspected. He was one of Britain's most respected family doctors. Patients loved him. He was attentive, kind, and thorough. He made house calls. He sat with the elderly. Harold Shipman killed them. Between the 1970s and 1998, Dr. Harold Shipman systematically murdered his patients, mostly elderly women, with lethal injections of diamorphine. He forged medical records afterward to make deaths appear natural. Death rates among his patients were dramatically elevated compared to other practices. Nobody noticed for decades. He was finally caught after forging the will of a victim named Kathleen Grundy, who had named him as her sole beneficiary. Her daughter, a solicitor, was suspicious. A toxicology report on Grundy's exhumed body found lethal levels of diamorphine. Shipman was convicted of 15 murders in 2000. A subsequent public inquiry, the Shipman Inquiry, concluded he had likely killed 215 patients, making him the most prolific confirmed serial killer in modern history. He was found hanged in his prison cell in January 2004, the day before his 58th birthday, taking his true motive to the grave. 6. Pedro Lopez. Round Pushpin, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru crime period. 1969-1980 victims, 300 plus confessed. Pedro Lopez may be the most prolific convicted serial killer in world history, and today, his whereabouts are unknown. Born in Tolima, Colombia in 1948, Lopez endured a childhood of extreme poverty and abuse. He claims to have killed his first victim in 1969. Over the following decade, he preyed on young girls across Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. He confessed to over 300 murders when captured in Ecuador in 1980, after a flash flood in a market town exposed buried remains. He led police to more than 53 graves. Ecuadorian authorities convicted him of 57 murders. He served only 14 years before being declared sane and released in 1994, and then quietly handed over to Colombia, where he was released again in 1998. He has never been found. Interpol issued a warrant. Various unconfirmed sightings have placed him in Colombia and possibly beyond. The monster of the Andes walked free and vanished, a fact that haunts investigators and victims' families to this day. 5. Luis Garvey. Round Pushpin, Colombia, crime period. 1992-1999, victims, 138 confirmed. Colombia has a devastating place in the history of serial crime, and Luis Garavito is a central reason why. Known as La Bestia, the Beast, Garavito targeted homeless boys, often disabled or orphaned children, between 1992 and 1999. He lured them with small gifts, then transported them to remote areas. The confirmed death toll stands at 138, with over 300 additional cases suspected by Colombian authorities. His capture in 1999 came after a surviving victim escaped and identified him. The confession that followed was staggering in scale. Yet Colombia's sentencing laws at the time meant his sentence was capped. With time served and behavioral credits, Garavito became eligible for release, a development that caused national outrage. Legal proceedings, reforms, and further charges have kept him incarcerated, but his eventual fate remains a deeply contested issue in Colombia. His case triggered sweeping reforms in Colombian criminal law and remains a reference point in international discussions on sentencing for mass murderers. 4. Jeffrey Dahmer. Round Pushpin, United States crime period. 1978-1991, victims, 17. On the night of May 27, 1991, a 14-year-old boy named Konrak Synthesomphone was found wandering, confused and injured, on a Milwaukee street. Neighbors called 911. Police arrived. Jeffrey Dahmer, who lived nearby, approached officers and told them the boy was his adult boyfriend who had drunk too much. The officers let Dahmer take him home. Konrak Synthesomphone did not survive the night. Dahmer's crimes are among the most disturbing ever documented. A catalog of murder, dismemberment, necrophilia, and cannibalism carried out in his Milwaukee apartment between 1978 and 1991. His 17 victims were mostly Black and Latino men and boys, a demographic that critics and victims' families argued was deprioritized by investigators for years. His arrest came in July 1991 when a man named Tracy Edwards escaped, flagged down a police car, and led officers back to apartment 213. What they found stunned even seasoned detectives. Dahmer was convicted of 15 of the 16 murders charged in Wisconsin. He was beaten to death by a fellow inmate in November 1994. The families of his victims never received full answers. Many are still seeking acknowledgement for systemic failures that allowed him to continue for so long. 3. Ted Bundy. Round Pushpin, United States crime period. 1970s victims, 30+ confirmed. Ted Bundy was handsome, articulate, charming. He volunteered at a suicide crisis hotline. He studied law. He helped Anne Rule, who would later write the definitive book about him, Answer Crisis Calls Through the Night. She described him as one of the most decent people she had ever known. He confessed to 30 murders across 7 states. The real number may be higher. Bundy kidnapped, assaulted, and murdered young women throughout the Pacific Northwest, Colorado, Utah, and Florida during the 1970s. He escaped police custody twice. Once by jumping from a library window during a court hearing. Once by squeezing through a ceiling crawlspace in a prison. Both escapes led to additional murders. He was finally caught in February 1978 after attacking Florida State University students in a sorority house, killing 2 and injuring 3 others, then murdering 12-year-old Kimberly Leach weeks later. Bundy represented himself at trial. He proposed to his girlfriend in the courtroom as a legal maneuver. He prolonged his execution with appeals for a decade, trading murder confessions for stays. He was executed in Florida's electric chair on January 24, 1989. Outside the prison, people cheered. 2. Jack the Ripper. Round Pushpin, England location. Whitechapel, London year. 1888 victims. 5 confirmed case, unsolved. No name on this list has endured longer. No case has generated more books, theories, documentaries, or obsession, and no killer has never been caught. In the autumn of 1888, 5 women, Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, were brutally murdered in the Whitechapel district of London. The killer struck with surgical precision, and taunting letters arrived at Scotland Yard, the most famous signed Jack the Ripper. The victims were poor women, many involved in sex work, living in desperate poverty in one of Victorian London's most overcrowded neighborhoods. Their deaths caused a sensation, but their lives were largely ignored by the society that surrounded them. More than 130 years later, the case remains officially unsolved. Hundreds of ripperologists have proposed suspects ranging from a Polish barber to a member of the royal family to the artist Walter Sickert. DNA evidence reported by a team in 2019 pointed toward a Polish immigrant named Aaron Kosminski, but that evidence has been widely challenged by forensic experts. The Ripper was never caught. He was never named. And somehow, impossibly, he is still more famous than almost any criminal who came after him, including many who killed far more people. 1. H. Holmes. Round Pushpin, United States crime period. 1890s location. Chicago. Our number 1 is not necessarily the deadliest, or the most prolific, or the most recent. He is number 1 because he was, in many ways, where modern serial murder as a public phenomenon began. Herman Webster Mudgett, who called himself Dr. Henry Howard Holmes, was a trained physician, a charming con man, and a meticulous architect of death. In the early 1890s, he constructed a large building on the outskirts of Chicago, conveniently timed with the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition, which drew tens of millions of visitors to the city. The building became known, after his crimes were discovered, as the Murder Castle. It contained hidden rooms, gas lines, secret chutes that led to a basement furnace, and other features whose purpose became horrifyingly clear after his arrest. Holmes lured workers, hotel guests, women he courted through newspaper ads, and others to the building. How many died there remains unknown. Holmes confessed to 27 murders, though some scholars believe the true number was far lower, and others believe it was higher. He was caught not for the Chicago murders, but for insurance fraud. Authorities investigating a scheme to fake a friend's death unraveled a trail that led back to Holmes and ultimately to the castle. He was executed by hanging on May 7, 1896. Erik Larson's best-selling book, The Devil in the White City, brought Holmes's story to new generations of readers. A television adaptation has been in production for years, testament to the enduring, horrifying fascination with the man. Holmes didn't just kill, he engineered it. He monetized it. He turned murder into architecture. And in doing so, he forced society to confront, perhaps for the first time in modern media history, the concept that a human being could be something else entirely. Pushpin closing segment, current status plus tribute plus call to action. What we've covered today is only a fraction of the documented history of serial violence. But across every case, across every continent and decade, certain patterns emerge. Investigators learn. Forensic science advances. DNA technology that didn't exist in 1978 put Gary Ridgway in handcuffs in 2001. Computer metadata that didn't exist in 1974 caught Dennis Rader in 2005. Databases that connect cases across states and countries are identifying victims and suspects decades after the crimes. The lesson is not that evil wins. The lesson is that evil leaves traces, and that science, persistence, and the refusal to forget are the most powerful tools we have against it. Several families on this list are still seeking closure. The 7 unidentified victims of John Wayne Gacy, some unnamed for decades, have gradually been given back their identities through renewed DNA efforts, the most recent identifications coming as recently as 2023. Families of the Green River Killer's victims continue advocacy work for the rights of missing and murdered women, especially those from vulnerable communities. The victims of Pedro Lopez are still without justice. He remains unaccounted for. And in Waitecapel, 5 women who were failed by their society and life have never seen their killer face justice in death. Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, Mary Jane Kelly. Their names deserve to outlast the name of the man who took their lives. In memory of every victim named in this video, and every victim whose name we still don't know, you are not forgotten. You were more than a case number. You were more than a chapter in someone else's infamy. You mattered. You still do. Speech balloon viewer engagement question. Before you go, we want to hear from you. Which of these cases haunts you the most, and why? Is it the ones that were never solved? The ones where killers walked free? Or the cases where the system failed victims long before a single crime was committed? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe in the importance of keeping these stories alive, for the sake of the victims and their families, please subscribe, share this video, and hit the bell so you never miss an upload.